The night drifts evenly, the air is cool and steady. Somewhere outside, leaves shift just enough to be heard. The world has lowered its voice. Darkness does not arrive all at once. It moves quietly across the walls, softening corners, hiding edges. It rests on rooftops, on open fields, on the surface of water that no longer glitters. The sky loses its distance. Everything feels closer, slower, heavier in a kind way. Within this calm, the day begins to loosen. Every sound becomes a memory of motion. A door, a footstep, a breath. You can sense the world finishing its sentence, then falling silent. There is nothing to fix, nothing to prove. Only this gentle suspension between what has been done and what is not yet begun. The darkness carries the stories of many nights before. Long ago, people also sat quietly in rooms like this, letting the light fade from the fire. They listened to the steady ticking of time that no one could see. They slept in small houses, in fields, under open skies. The pattern of rest was older than language, older than plans. The body simply followed the rhythm of the dark. We are listening to those ancient patterns now, listening to how sleep once arrived in fragments, in waves, in the turning of breath. We are not rushing toward it. We are only allowing it to find us again. There are no arguments here, no judgments waiting. The night is not asking for opinions. It simply opens space. It lets you be unfinished, half awake, half asleep, without demand. Everything is told slowly. A thought drifts in, pauses and leaves. Another follows, then fades. Between them, quiet expands like the horizon before dawn. If there is a story tonight, it is not about heroes or endings. It is only about being, the small life of breathing, the still pulse of the earth. For a moment, all centuries meet in this silence. We are part of it, and the night, patient as always, continues to move gently forward. Segmented sleep in the Middle Ages. There was a time before the hum of wires, before the steady glow of lamps that stretched the hours far past their natural edge. When the world turned dark, it truly turned dark, and night unfolded at its own quiet pace. People ended their days not by choice, but by the slow arrival of shadow. Candles were costly, oil was saved for necessity. So when the sun sank and the embers dimmed, the rhythm of life bent toward rest. Sleep came early because there was little else that could be done. They called it the first sleep, a deep, steady sinking into warmth. Bodies close to one another, wrapped in the faint smell of wood smoke and straw. For hours, the breathing in those rooms moved in unison. Slow, rough, familiar. The world outside stayed quiet except for wind and the call of distant animals. 4 hours would pass like that. Then, almost as if guided by some ancient clock, people would stir. Not all at once, not sharply, but in a gradual wakening. One person would add a log to the hearth, another would step outside for a moment, feeling the cool bite of air. Children turned in their sleep. Someone whispered a small thought that had waited all day to be spoken. This in-between time had no name stronger than the watch. It was a pause between dreams. Neither night nor morning. A time meant for tending small things. A cough, a restless child, the dying fire, the animals stirring in the pen. Some prayed. Some sat and thought. Others talked softly with the person beside them, voices low, words simple, meant only to fill the space gently. No one feared this waking. It was not restlessness, nor illness, nor failure. It was part of the pattern. The body rose from its first descent into sleep, drifted in wakefulness for a while, and then slipped again into the second sleep. Lighter, longer, peaceful. In those hours, the world seemed different. The night was no longer something to escape, but something to move within. The firelight spread across stone walls, painting them amber. The silence was not empty. It was full of slow life. The turning of the logs, the shifting of straw, the small sigh of a house alive in its own rhythm. Across villages, this cycle repeated, in wooden huts, in stone manors, in townhouses near the square. The rhythm of the night was universal, accepted, and without resistance. People knew when to lie down, when to rise briefly, when to rest again. Their sleep followed the temperature, the light, the season. In winter, nights were long and the two sleeps stretched wide apart. In summer, they shortened but still remained distinct. There was no idea of perfection in rest, no anxiety about 8 straight hours, no clock on the wall to measure failure. If a person woke at midnight, it was simply what happened. They would sit, breathe, and wait until their eyes grew heavy once more. The first sleep was deep, the kind that carried the body's fatigue away. The second was gentler, where the mind drifted more freely. Dreams during the second sleep were often clearer, closer to waking thought. People said that answers came then, or messages or memories. Whether true or not, it added to the calm mystery of the dark. Imagine the quiet of those moments, a room lit only by the dull orange of a fading fire. The faint smell of hay and wool, a pot cooling near the hearth, the steady pulse of the wind outside, pressing softly against the shutters. A person sitting up, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the embers without needing to think much at all. They might whisper to the one beside them, a thought about the field, the market, a memory of a dream. Or they might speak to no one, letting silence answer for them. This too was companionship. In a world with few distractions, wakefulness was not a burden, but a small window, a pause where time felt like it had stopped moving forward. Animals shifted in their stalls. Some nights, a distant bell from a monastery would mark an hour. The sound traveled through the cold air, reaching the ears of farmers half a mile away. It was not an alarm, not a demand, just another rhythm folded into the larger one. When the body grew heavy again, there was no decision to sleep, no turning off of anything, no command. The person simply lay back, the warmth of the hearth still clinging to the air, and drifted into the second rest. The two halves of the night met quietly, as if nodding to each other before parting. For scholars and workers alike, the same rhythm held true. Writers of the time mention waking between sleeps to read, to write, to pray, or to think. Peasants tended to small repairs, adjusted nets, checked for leaks. Women nursed children or prepared dough that would rise by morning. The boundary between wake and sleep was porous, a soft edge, not a wall. There was no need to name insomnia because there was no fear of it. Waking in darkness was as natural as breathing. It belonged to the night the way dawn belonged to the day. The human body followed its cues without defiance. Light told it when to rest, dark told it when to wake. And in that balance there was peace. Today this rhythm might seem foreign. We fill our nights with brightness and sound, turning darkness into something to be conquered. But then night was a companion. Cool, slow, and alive. People trusted it. They surrendered to it without effort. When morning neared, the air thinned. A faint silver began to gather at the edges of windows. Roosters stirred. Some dogs barked softly, sensing movement. The sleepers turned for a final hour or two, held between dreams and the coming day. Soon, the second sleep would end on its own. A yawn, a stretch, the rustle of straw, the first step onto cold ground. There was no rush. The day waited as it always did. In that world, there was no separation between nature and routine. Sleep was not something to manage. It was something that happened. A pulse of life, slow and dependable, beating in time with fire and wind. Even in cities where streets were narrow and close, the pattern survived. Merchants slept as the farmers did, though their fires were smaller and the air less pure. Servants rose in the middle of the night to tend stables or carry water. Guards walked along stone walls, listening to their own footsteps. Each in their own way moved with the same rhythm. The night held everyone together, the rich and the poor, the tired and the sleepless. Its silence was a shared fabric. Every window that glowed faintly with a fading candle was part of the same breathing system. The idea of segmented sleep lasted for centuries. It faded only when the world brightened, when lamps became common and factories began to pull labor deep into the night, when the ticking of clocks entered homes and set new rules for rest and work. But long before that, the two sleeps shaped how people understood the night. It was not a straight line from dusk to dawn. It was a slow tide, ebbing and returning. Even now the body remembers. There are nights when you wake for no reason. A quiet hour where thought feels clearer, air feels sharper, time feels slower. That is the echo of those old hours. The body still knows. It remembers that rest was once made of two parts, not one. It remembers that stillness does not always mean sleep, and that wakefulness does not always mean unrest. If you were there, in a small house, a single candle burning, you would have felt the calm woven into every wall. You would have heard nothing and everything at once. The breath of others, the wood shifting, the snow falling softly outside. And you would have known that this too was sleep. Sleep was not a destination, but a landscape, something to travel through slowly. The first dream took you into the dark. The waking brought you to the edge of thought. The second dream carried you back again, lighter, smoother, quieted. There was no need for explanation. It was simply how night was lived. In that world, there were no alarms waiting, no screens calling for attention. The hours belonged entirely to the dark. Even the stars seemed closer because nothing interrupted the sky. When people spoke of the night, they did not mean fear. They meant the stretch of time when life loosened, when the air cooled and everything that worked all day finally rested. That rest was not perfect. It was human, uneven, soft, incomplete, yet whole in its own rhythm. And when dawn finally reached the windows, it did not break the night. It only completed it. The two halves of sleep folded together like hands. The story of rest was never one long silence. but a pattern of arrivals and returns. So the night turned, century after century, under stars that never hurried. People slept, woke, and slept again. No one timed them. No one measured the worth of their dreams. They rested because it was dark, and they woke because it was time. That was all. And it was enough. Beds, bedding, sleeping space. In the quiet dark, the place of sleep was not a luxury. It was a corner of necessity, a soft hollow in a world still rough around the edges. The bed, as we imagine it now, did not yet exist in comfort or design. It was a frame of wood, sometimes nothing more than planks joined together, holding a sack filled with straw. The straw was changed when the smell grew too heavy, or when insects had found their way in. It rustled under every shift of weight, a dry reminder of the earth it came from. Sheets were rare. Cloth was valuable, often spun by hand, used until it frayed to threads. If there was fabric to spare, it was reserved for clothing, not bedding. Most people lay down still wearing what they had worn through the day, wool or linen, thick with work and dust. The fabric kept warmth close. It was less about cleanliness, more about surviving the chill. Families shared space. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents too, arranged themselves in a line, shoulders touching. The smallest stayed in the middle, where body heat gathered. The rhythm of breathing became a kind of lullaby, uneven but familiar. The night wrapped around them like a single, slow breath. Houses were small and privacy was not a thought yet named. Walls divided space for purpose, not for solitude. Sleep was communal, not intimate, a shared act of endurance. To rest near others meant safety, warmth in the cold months, company in the dark. In the humbler homes, beds were placed close to the hearth. The ashes of yesterday's fire still held a memory of heat. A small flame, banked low under the logs, breathed faint light into the room. It flickered across rough surfaces, the outline of a stool, a pot, a hand-woven basket. The glow moved slowly, touching faces that had long forgotten their tension. Sometimes the mattress was not straw, but leaves, moss, or old cloth packed together. It was uneven but soft enough. When the floor was stone, people spread animal skins beneath them. When it was wood, they layered blankets over the gaps. Comfort was a small victory, not a guarantee. In the homes of merchants or officials, the bed might rise on a frame high enough to store trunks beneath. The straw was replaced with feathers if the household could afford it. A rare softness, light as breath. Such beds were passed down, the wood carved and darkened over years, the weight of generations pressing quietly into its grain. Sleep itself became an heirloom. The air in those rooms was always cool. Stone walls held the day's chill. Windows were small and covered with thin linen or parchment. The night entered through cracks, whispering against the edges of the frame. People wrapped scarves around their heads, wore caps stitched from old cloth, and pulled their cloaks close, even in bed. Heat came from bodies, not from the room. There was no scent of detergent or linen, only smoke, wool, and human breath. Yet, to those who lived within it, it was not unpleasant. It was the smell of home, of the night as it was meant to be. The softness came not from the fabric, but from the stillness that sleep offered. In the cities, inns lined the roads for travelers. Beds were long and wide, meant for several bodies. A traveler arriving late shared space with strangers. There were no partitions, only trust in custom. Each person turned gently, careful not to disturb the others. Belongings stayed close, tied to the body or placed under the head. The night passed in a rhythm of shared breath, footsteps in the hallway, a faint creak of wood. In those places, dreams mixed. Unknown lives crossing for a few hours, then parting forever. No one spoke much before lying down. Sleep was practical, silent, and equal. The bed did not ask who a person was, it only offered rest. At times, even strangers found comfort in the nearness of others. The sound of another breathing in the dark carried its own reassurance. Proof that the world was still inhabited, that night had not swallowed everything. For the lonely traveller, that was enough. In larger houses, the rooms of rest were more elaborate, but the idea remained the same. Heavy curtains hung around the bed, not for beauty, but for warmth and a sense of boundary. The enclosed air grew warmer, filled with the soft rhythm of sleep. Outside, the night continued its quiet work. Frost on the windows, wind in the thatch, the slow ticking of time unmeasured. In these chambers, the furniture spoke of care, carved chests, folded quilts, a basin of water, a stool by the bedside for shoes. Even in wealth, the night was still simple. There were no lamps burning endlessly, no hum of machines. Darkness remained intact, untouched by light beyond the fire's reach. And across all homes, poor, rich, or in between, one thing was shared. Sleep was not a performance. It was not counted or optimized or judged. It was a quiet part of life, given and taken naturally like breathing. The bed was not a symbol of status, but a place of return. When the cold deepened, people slept closer. A husband and wife might turn back to back, layers of wool between them, conserving heat through stillness. Children curled around the warmth of parents. Animals sometimes slept near the door. Dogs, cats, goats, bringing the scent of the outside world with them. The mingled air was thick but alive. It was a small ecosystem of warmth and patience. There was a certain humility to it. No expectation of silence, no pursuit of perfection. A cough here, a snore there, the slow shifting of straw. These were not disruptions but proof of life. Night was not sterile. It was inhabited. The idea of a personal bed untouched by others came much later. For most of history, to sleep alone was a mark of separation. A luxury or a loneliness, depending on how one looked at it. Back then, togetherness was survival. The warmth of another body meant safety, and so people shared not only space but the invisible rhythm of their rest. In some houses, the floor above the animals held the sleeping family. The heat from below rose through gaps in the boards, gentle as breath. The smell of hay and wool mingled with the sound of slow breathing. Outside, the snow fell quietly, blanketing the roof. Inside, the air was warm enough to last until dawn. The simplicity of those nights feels distant now, yet there was balance in it, a kind of trust between the body and the world. No search for perfect posture, no battle with light or noise, only adaptation. People rested as the earth rested in cycles of cold and warmth, dark and dawn. Every bed carried its own small universe, the weight of the day's fatigue, the shape of those who lay upon it, the faint echo of whispered talk before silence returned. When they closed their eyes, they fell into sleep without wondering how long it would last. It lasted as long as it needed to. To lie down in that time was not a retreat, but a ritual. slow, physical, humble, blankets drawn, fire banked low, shoes placed near the wall. A short moment of stillness before surrender. Then the slow sinking into the texture of straw, into the murmurs of others, into the peace that does not announce itself. The night, indifferent yet kind, watched over them all. The beds were narrow, the air was cold, the space was shared. But within those limits there was gentleness, and that gentleness, more than comfort, was what made rest possible. When morning came, the light entered quietly. The straw crackled as bodies moved, blankets were folded, clothes brushed free of dust. The fire was stirred again, and another day began. Work, noise, warmth, hunger, until the dark returned to gather them back. Through centuries, the memory of those spaces lingers, not the luxury, not the fabric, but the feeling that rest could exist in simplicity, that sleep could be shared without fear, that peace did not need perfection. The beds were made of straw and cloth, the rooms were cold and small, yet inside them humanity learned the shape of stillness. And from that stillness a deeper kind of rest was born, the kind that asked for nothing but time and dark. Sleeping with animals, half-sitting rest. In many homes, sleep was not a private act. It happened in company, but sometimes with family, sometimes with animals that lived under the same roof. The walls were thin, the winters were long, and warmth had to be shared. Cows, pigs, dogs, and chickens each had their corner not far from the bed. The breath of the animals rose and fell with the rhythm of human sleep. It was a living kind of heat, steady, humid, and real. The air smelled of hay, smoke, and fur. For those who lived within it, this was not unpleasant. It was the scent of security, of life, gathered in one space to survive the cold. The night was a time of quiet breathing. Many small lungs, human and not, exhaling together into the dark. A dog shifted near the door, a cow stirred, then settled again. The house, though poor, felt alive. The closeness between people and animals was practical before it was sentimental. Every bit of warmth mattered. The heat of one living thing passed into another, as simple as air. When the temperature dropped, it was not the blanket that saved them, but the combined breath of everything that slept. Each night was a silent exchange, warmth for safety, safety for sleep. Children grew up beside this rhythm. They knew the sound of a goat turning in the straw, the sigh of a horse outside, the muffled steps of hens on the beam. These sounds were part of night's vocabulary. They marked time without counting it. To fall asleep among them was to belong to a small world that asked for nothing more than stillness. Some homes had a loft above the stable, a narrow floor that caught the rising heat from the animals below. The boards were uneven but warm. Families would spread straw or cloth and sleep above the gentle noise of the herd. If you woke in the middle of the night, you would hear a cow chewing, slow and patient, and the sound would lull you back to rest. It was not quiet, but it was peace. There was no thought of separation between man and beast in these hours. They shared the same air, the same winter, the same dependence on the fire's small light. When snow pressed against the door, everyone breathed slower, conserving warmth as one organism. Even fear of the night, the storm, the wind, the unknown grew smaller when life gathered close together. Sleep took many shapes. Not everyone lay flat. Some preferred to rest half-sitting, backs against the headboard or a pile of pillows. It was said to help the lungs to keep dreams lighter, to prevent the heavy pressure that came from lying too deep. People called it the upright rest. The posture was not born from comfort, but from wisdom passed through bodies that had learned by feeling. In some cases, the choice was necessity. Those who coughed, those who worked in cold air, or carried sickness in their chests, could breathe easier while sitting up. A chair pulled close to the bed, a blanket wrapped around the shoulders. That was enough.
The head nodded forward, lifted, then nodded again, until sleep took what it could.
Rest came in fragments, but it was still rest. Beds then were not made for softness. They were firm, filled with straw or wool. The body adjusted to them, not the other way around. To sleep half-sitting was not discomfort, but a habit the muscles learned to accept. People knew how to balance between rest and alertness, between surrender and readiness. In a world without locks, being half awake was sometimes safer than being lost in dreams, and so the half-sitting posture carried a quiet alertness. It allowed the sleeper to wake quickly if the wind rose, if an animal stirred, if something outside shifted. The eyes could open to the dark and see just enough of the world to stay calm. Sleep was not escape. It was a negotiation with the night. The line between awareness and rest was thin, yet peaceful. This way of sleeping shaped the rhythm of thought. Dreams were shallow, easier to remember. Waking came without confusion. The boundary between dream and morning was gentle. No alarms, no sudden breaks. Only the slow return of sound, the quiet sense that the world had survived another night. In cities and villages alike, the half-sitting rest could be found among the elderly and those who worked through the cold. Some leaned against the wall beside the fire, wrapped in layers, their faces half lit by the last glow of embers. They slept where they sat, heads bowed, arms folded. To a stranger, it might have looked like waiting, but it was sleep. Slow, drifting, unforced. Sleep was not measured by perfection, but by enough. Enough warmth, enough quiet, enough safety to let go for a while. Even half sleep counted because morning always arrived. At times, whole families might sleep sitting upright during travel, in carts, on benches, in waiting rooms. The motion of the body learned to follow the motion of the world. To lean slightly forward, to rest the hands, to close the eyes. It was a skill shaped by necessity, not luxury. Rest was wherever stillness could be found. The night, too, learned to hold them. It wrapped around both people and animals like a slow tide. Outside, frost gathered on the window frames. Inside, breath turned to mist and faded again. Every living thing exhaled its small measure of warmth, and the house stayed alive. In such nights, sleep came not as a fall, but as a drift. No one rushed toward it. It arrived on its own, like fog rising from the fields. Dreams moved slowly, shaped by the rhythm of breath, the sound of an animal shifting, the whisper of straw. The air was heavy, kind, and old. The poor had fewer choices, but their rest carried a kind of intimacy, a closeness to the earth, to the animals, to each other. Their posture was not elegant, but their peace was deep. They accepted the uneven bed, the shared warmth, the sounds that filled the dark. To sleep in imperfection and wake renewed. That was their quiet art. When dawn came, it did not break the night sharply. Light seeped in through cracks touching fur, wood, faces. Animals stirred first, shaking frost from their coats. People followed soon after, stretching stiff joints, rubbing warmth back into their hands. The day began without drama. The long breathing of night gave way to the soft rhythm of morning tasks. Looking back, it is easy to call it hardship. Yet in that stillness there was balance. Humans and animals sharing one breath of warmth, bodies resting as the world rested, no noise but the sound of life continuing. Sleep was not isolation, it was belonging. The posture, half sitting, half lying, was more than position. It was a symbol of living between effort and ease, between waking and surrender. It taught patience. It taught the body to rest without asking for comfort. And when the mind grew quiet enough, that posture became a meditation, a middle space where life itself breathed through the night. Even now, when people wake in the dark, shifting in their beds, sitting up without reason, the body remembers. It remembers the warmth of shared breath, the closeness of other lives, the rhythm of half-sleep. It remembers how to rest even while awake and how to trust the dark again. The night remains long and kind. Sleep comes and goes like the tide, steady, forgiving. It does not need silence. It only needs time. And time, in the dark, moves softly enough for everything to rest. Insects, hygiene, and small adaptations. Night in the old world was never entirely still. Even when every candle had burned out, life continued to move quietly through the dark. In the corners of houses, under the seams of fabric, inside the straw that softened the floor, there were always small things awake. Wood creaked. A moth brushed its wings against the wall. Something tiny shifted under the blanket. And yet people slept. The houses of that time were built from the earth itself. Timber, thatch, clay, straw. The same warmth that sheltered humans also invited insects. Beneath every beam, along the edges of the bed, in the weave of cloth, there were silent guests. They came with the seasons, fleas in summer, lice in winter, beetles in the straw. Each night carried its own small company. Beds made of straw held more than just the weight of the sleeper. The straw was dry when new, clean when first stuffed into the sack. But within days, the warmth of the body, the dampness of breath, the quiet of the room made it a perfect world for tiny lives to grow. People knew this, and they accepted it as part of the cost of sleep. Each evening, before lying down, they shook the bedding, lifted the cloth, and scattered herbs across the straw. Lavender when they had it, mint or thyme when they did not. Sometimes dried leaves were burned near the bed, their smoke meant to drive away the biting things. The air filled with that faint bitter sweetness, part medicine, part ritual. For a while it worked. Then slowly the night reclaimed its small inhabitants. There were tricks passed from one generation to another. Mix ashes with the straw, they said, to keep the fleas from multiplying. Hang the bedding near the fire once a week. Brush the seams with vinegar. Use leaves from walnut trees or sprinkle salt near the edges. None of it worked completely.
But people didn't expect perfection.
They only hoped for a few hours of peace. When the bites came, they did not rise in anger. They shifted, scratched lightly, turned to the cooler side, and slept again. The body learned to live with small discomforts. The mind learned to let go. In those nights, rest was not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to stay calm inside it. Children grew up knowing that the world was never entirely theirs alone. They learned the sounds, the faint patter in the straw, the soft tapping inside the walls. At first, it frightened them. Later, it became part of the night's vocabulary. The noise was not danger, it was simply presence. A reminder that life continued, even in silence. In the poorest homes, the fight against insects was endless. Fleas hid in seams of clothing, in folds of blankets, in the straw beneath the floor. After harvest, people replaced the bedding, carrying fresh straw from the fields. They worked quickly, laughing sometimes, shaking out the old sacks, beating them with sticks to release what crawled inside. It was routine, almost gentle, not a battle, but maintenance. In the houses of wealth, the problem was different but not gone. Feather beds were softer, but the fabric that held them gathered dust, and with dust came mites. Perfumed oils masked the scent, yet the tiny movements continued beneath the layers. No amount of luxury could separate people entirely from the earth. Even under silk, the hum of small lives remained. Every culture had its own remedies. Some scattered herbs. Others relied on smoke, on oil, on salt, on patience. Cleanliness was a rhythm, not a state. Each morning, beds were aired near windows. Sheets, when they existed, were hung on ropes, the wind shaking loose the invisible guests. The sound of fabric flapping was part of every village dawn. In winter, the air grew too cold to clean often. The bedding stayed thick, heavy, unmoved for weeks. When people woke scratching, they warmed ashes from the hearth and spread them thinly across the mattress. Ash, soft and pale, cooled the itch and drove away some of the pests. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of bodies, of wool, of life lived close to the fire. It was not cleanliness as we know it, but it was survival, balanced with acceptance. Acceptance, in that world, was not resignation. It was understanding. The people knew that to live close to the ground was to live among other things. The boundary between human and nature was thinner then. Walls were only suggestions. The night belonged to all who could endure it, and so they slept. Among straw, among insects, among sounds too small to name. When they turned in their sleep, the straw whispered back, a dry, comforting sound. When the itch came, they shifted. When the air cooled, they pulled the blanket higher. Sleep did not demand silence. It asked only for surrender. To live without complaint was its own form of peace. The mind grew accustomed to the imperfections of rest. Dreams floated over discomfort, weaving around it like water around stones. In that balance, the body found calm. The small disturbances became part of the rhythm, not enemies of it. Insects were never completely gone. They followed people through centuries, from straw beds to wooden ones, from cottages to cities. The forms changed, but the coexistence remained. Each age had its own version of the same problem and the same quiet endurance. It was perhaps an unspoken wisdom that peace was not the removal of what irritates, but the softening of response.
That rest is not the absence of noise, but the ability to hear it and remain still.
The sleepers of that time lived close to that truth, without needing to name it. Sometimes, in the stillness between dreams, they might feel a small movement on the skin.
A tickle, a flicker, a pulse.
The instinct to wake was there, but instead they breathed, turned, and returned to the rhythm of the night. The disturbance dissolved in patience.
The night continued.
The straw bed crackled under the weight of shifting bodies. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. Inside, the fire dimmed to embers, and the house, imperfect, alive, held all its occupants in the same quiet pattern of endurance. When dawn came, the first light entered like forgiveness. The cold air touched faces, the bite marks faded, and the mind remembered only the warmth that had carried it through. The insects withdrew to their hiding places as if obeying the day. Life resumed its routine: shake the straw, open the door, breathe the morning. To sleep in that world was to trust in repetition. The same rituals each night, the same small challenges, the same gentle patience. Rest was never perfect, but it was complete. The human body, like the houses it lived in, had learned how to coexist. Not with ease, but with grace. And perhaps that was the quietest lesson of all. That comfort does not begin when the world stops bothering us. It begins when we learn to stay soft within it.
The sleepers of that age understood this without words.
They accepted the night as it was, alive, imperfect, endlessly shared. And in doing so, they found peace enough to dream. Sounds of the night. The night was never silent. Even when every door was closed, every lamp gone out, the air still carried its own quiet motion. Sound moved like breath, soft, unhurried, passing through cracks and over roofs, touching everything that slept. There were bells, first of all. They marked the hours, slow and even, a rhythm older than clocks. Each note spread across the fields, drifting over rooftops, sinking into the walls of houses half asleep. In towns, people knew the sound well. It was not a call, not a warning, just a reminder that time continued even when no one watched it. One bell for each hour. The deep tones of iron fading into air that smelled faintly of rain. Wind was another voice. It brushed against shutters, sighed through the thatch, and filled the chimneys with low murmurs. Sometimes it carried the faint moan of far branches bending. Sometimes it was steady, like breathing. The wind was both guest and host. It entered uninvited, but everyone accepted it. When it was strong, it became company. When gentle, it became song. There were the sounds of water. Rain fell often, slow and constant. It touched every surface differently. Wood, stone, soil, metal. Each gave its own tone. A roof of straw whispered, a roof of tile clicked and echoed. In some nights, the whole village seemed to pulse with the same rhythm. Rain and sleep, sleep and rain. The night did not quiet itself for the sake of rest. It taught rest to exist within its noise.
Inside the houses, smaller sounds filled the dark.
The fire shrinking, crackling into ember, the slow settling of wood as it cooled, a spoon shifting in a bowl, the sigh of a sleeper turning over. The world was made of such movements, not loud, but endless. Even silence was textured, full of soft edges. From outside came the faint noises of animals. A dog stirred and returned to sleep.
A horse stamped once against the stable floor.
Owls called from somewhere unseen. Their hoots rose, hung, and disappeared into fog. People did not wake for them. They recognized those sounds as part of the order of things. The body listened, then accepted, then rested deeper. In the towns, the night had a different voice. The echo of footsteps on stone streets.
A cartwheel rolling late.
The rustle of cloth as someone passed by the market wall, watchmen calling the hours, voices overlapping with the bells. Past midnight, 2 of the clock, all's well. Those sounds, once startling, became the heartbeat of safety. People learned that a voiced night was not a dangerous one. A city that whispered was a city still alive. Farther out, beyond the lights, the countryside had its own quiet rhythm. The murmur of streams beneath frozen banks.
The clatter of branches in the forest.
Sometimes the cry of a fox, short, sharp, almost human, cutting through the dark. Then stillness again, heavy and clear. The silence that followed was never empty. It was filled with the residue of sound, fading slowly into memory. The human ear grew patient in that age. There were no walls thick enough to seal the world away, no glass to block the night. People did not chase silence. They learned to move with the music of the dark. A door creaking, a beam settling, the low hum of wind across the fields. These became lullabies in their own way. Children fell asleep to them, and adults found comfort in their familiarity. The sense of time followed the noise. Every sound marked its own kind of hour. The bell told when to turn in bed. The fire's hiss told how near dawn might be. The roosters, far off in another yard, began their early murmurs long before the sky turned grey. Each was a clock, natural and unhurried, belonging only to those who listened.
Sometimes storms came.
Rain turned fierce, wind grew wild, the night shook, the walls trembled, and the sound of the world filled every space. Sleep then was a kind of surrender, not escape, but trust. People pulled the blankets closer and let the sound wash over them. When thunder rolled, they waited between its echoes, breathing with the rhythm of the storm. It was not frightening, only vast, a reminder of the scale of things. In smaller hours, when the storm had passed, a strange quiet followed. Drops fell from eaves in steady intervals. Water trickled through gutters, ran down the cobblestones, gathered in the earth. The smell of rain entered the rooms, clean and cool. Those who woke briefly felt the calm as something physical. Air washed new, sound softened to near nothing. Then they slept again, easily. The night was a teacher of patience. It never stayed still long enough to be predictable, but those who lived within it found a way to belong to its rhythm. They did not chase silence. They rested with sound, not against it. A mother might wake to the cry of a child, soothe it with quiet humming, then fall asleep before finishing the song. A father might listen to the last crackle of firewood, waiting until the final pop before drifting off. The room, the house, the whole village breathed in synchrony, not in silence, but in harmony.
When travelers spoke of the quiet countryside, they did not mean absence of noise.
They meant a world where every sound had a place. The wind knew its hour, the bell its note, the rain its pace. And within that orchestration, humans learned to close their eyes without needing to block anything out. In time, the body itself began to adapt. The ear, once startled by creaks and echoes, came to treat them as part of the body's own system. The mind filtered what mattered and let the rest drift by like current. Even the irregular became rhythm. Even chaos found its pattern. The sound of night in that way was an inheritance, something learned and passed down without words. Generations of sleepers trained by centuries of wind and water, bells and hooves, whispers and breath. They did not demand stillness before surrendering to rest. They allowed the world to continue moving, and the world, in return, allowed them to dream. When dawn came, the noises shifted. The bell rang differently, higher, quicker. The first carts moved through the streets, their wheels groaning. Doors opened, voices returned. But none of it felt sudden. The night did not end, it transformed. The same sounds that once carried people into sleep now led them gently into waking. To sleep in that world was to be part of the larger soundscape, a single tone in the long, patient music of earth and air. There was no battle between silence and noise. Only coexistence,
only rhythm.
and as long as that rhythm continued, peace was possible.
The modern world, bright and loud, often forgets this.
But the body remembers. When you lie awake and hear the wind, or the hum of a distant car, or the quiet creak of the walls, these are not intrusions. They are echoes of older nights, when sound was part of safety. When the heart slowed not despite the noise, but because of it. Every age has its own lullaby. For them, it was the ringing of bells and the rustle of rain. For us, it may be the pulse of the city, the soft machines of the modern dark.
The song changes, but the rhythm remains. The night still hums.
The world still breathes, and sleep still comes, quietly, within the music of things. Travel and inns. Travel was slow. Roads stretched long and uncertain, unpaved, uneven, winding through fields and forests. For those who moved between towns, the night was not an interruption, but a necessary pause. The day ended wherever darkness found them. At a roadside inn, a stable, a stranger's home. Sleep belonged to whoever offered it. Inns were not like the ones imagined today. They were crowded, warm, and simple. A large room filled with beds or benches, straw on the floor, and the steady smell of travel, of dust, sweat, rain-soaked cloth. At the far end, a small fire kept burning, not for beauty, but for comfort. People gathered around it quietly, their faces lit in gold and shadow. When the time for rest came, there were no choices of privacy. Beds were shared. One mattress could hold 3, sometimes 4, strangers. The fabric between them was thin, the air was thick with shared breath. They turned carefully, keeping to their own narrow space, yet knowing that warmth came from proximity. Each body lent its heat to the others. The night became communal, stitched together by breath and patience. Some travelers tied their belongings close, a pouch under the arm, a belt across the chest, a knife beside the bed. Not from distrust, but from habit. On the road, one learned to guard quietly, to rest, half awake. Sleep came not from perfect stillness, but from the trust that the world would keep turning even as one's eyes closed. The sounds of an inn were steady and familiar, the creak of the floorboards, the mutter of low voices, a cough, the whistle of wind through the eaves. All of it merged into a soft hum, a kind of human ocean moving together toward rest. It was not silence that brought sleep, but rhythm, the rhythm of bodies surrendering to fatigue at the same time. Those who traveled alone found comfort in the crowd. The presence of others made the darkness smaller. Even the smell of the room, wood smoke, bread, sweat and wool, became a kind of reassurance. It meant they were not alone in the night. Sometimes, when no inn was near, travelers stopped at farms. A barn might open its doors to strangers. A farmer's wife would bring a lantern, a bowl of soup, a gesture of kindness too quiet to need words. People slept where space allowed, near the hay, beside animals, under the low beams of wood blackened by age. The hay rustled, the horses shifted, the night breathed through cracks in the wall. In such places, sleep came easily. The body recognized the sound of living things nearby and let go. Other nights were harder. A traveler might lie beside the road, cloak pulled over the head, listening for footsteps, for wind, for anything unfamiliar. Sleep then was thin, cautious, more like waiting than rest. But even then, between moments of vigilance, the mind drifted. The stars above moved imperceptibly, the body relaxed despite itself, and the night continued. Sleep found its way as it always did. In those times, rest was an act of courage. To close one's eyes in an unknown place required faith, not in people, but in the rhythm of the world itself. The same faith that made the sun rise, that made rivers return to their course, that brought dawn no matter how long the dark. The inns carried stories of these travelers, a merchant from the south, a soldier returning home, a widow carrying a bundle of cloth to market. Each carried fatigue, and each found the same release in that shared quiet. Differences of class or origin disappeared for a few hours. In the dark, every face looked alike. Every breath belonged to the same pulse. Some spoke before sleep, soft words about weather, about the road ahead, about someone waiting far away. Then silence, only the sound of the fire shrinking, a log collapsing inward with a sigh, and then nothing except the low hum of bodies entering the slow rhythm of dreams. Sleep among strangers was not uneasy. It was ordinary. The closeness of others became a boundary against the unknown. The night outside might be vast, but within those four walls there was enough safety to surrender. Sometimes someone would wake before dawn, a habit born from long journeys. They rose quietly, tied their shoes, fastened their packs. The floorboards groaned, a few heads turned, no words were spoken. By the time the first light touched the window, that traveler was already gone. The bed they left behind still warm, still shaped like the body that had lain there. Morning at the inn was slow. People stirred, rubbed their eyes, folded their blankets. The fire was rekindled. A pot of water boiled. The smell of bread and smoke filled the room again. Faces that had been strangers the night before now nodded to each other in silence. Acknowledgement without familiarity, warmth without memory. Then each stepped out into the world carrying the same weariness, the same gratitude for having made it through the dark. There was something humble and human in those shared nights. They reminded people of their sameness, all travelers under the same sky, all subject to the same fatigue. The bed, no matter how crowded or coarse, became a small symbol of belonging. It said, "Here, for a few hours, you are safe enough to rest." And when sleep finally came, it came without drama. No need for silence, no search for perfection. Only the slow surrender of the body to stillness. The inn breathed, the fire whispered, the rain tapped gently on the roof. Outside, the world turned as it always did. Inside, strangers dreamed side by side, sharing warmth without words. The road waited for them, but it did not hurry. It would still be there in the morning. For now, there was only this: a bed, a roof, a few hours of borrowed calm. Sleep was always temporary in such places. But temporary things often carry the most grace. They are taken for what they are, without demand, without illusion. And that acceptance made rest deeper than comfort ever could. When morning came fully, the last sleeper rose. The room was half empty, still filled with the echoes of breathing. A few embers glowed. Someone laughed softly at a dream. Then silence again. The calm between departures. Outside, the sky turned pale. The road stretched ahead, damp with dew. Boots pressed new footprints into the earth. And though the travelers would scatter, each to a different town, a different life, for a brief moment they had shared something ancient. The fragile peace of being unguarded together, the permission to rest. The world was never gentle, but the night, for those few hours, could be kind. And so they carried that kindness forward, in the memory of warmth, of breath, of closeness that asked for nothing in return. Collective rhythm and discipline. Night in the disciplined world followed a precise rhythm. There were hours for sleep, hours for waking, hours for work, and hours for stillness. The order of things was not questioned. It was known. The body obeyed because it had learned to trust repetition. In that repetition, there was peace. In the monasteries of the old world, the day was divided like a slow-breathing cycle. Even when darkness covered the walls, the bell defined the hour. It called not with urgency, but with calm certainty. Each note meant something: the end of labor, the beginning of rest, the time to reflect. The sound moved through the corridors like water through stone, touching every life inside the walls. Monks and lay people alike followed the same pulse. At certain times the fires were dimmed, at certain times the doors were closed, and at a precise hour all conversation ceased. The world narrowed to the quiet of shared intention. Even the act of lying down became ritual, deliberate, measured, understood. They did not speak of freedom as modern people do. For them, structure was freedom. The boundaries of time gave shape to the mind, like lines drawn in soft sand. Within those lines there was room to rest, to work, to breathe. No moment fought another. Everything belonged where it was. The human body adapts to what it repeats. When the same hour brings the same act, the body begins to prepare in advance. Sleep comes not as surprise, but as expectation. At the appointed time, eyes grow heavy, breath slows, thought softens. The rhythm becomes internal. The discipline of time seeps into muscle and bone, guiding without command. In those centuries, people did not ask whether they slept well. They slept because it was time. They rose because the bell said so. There was comfort in that certainty, a kind of invisible safety woven through the days. To be awake at the right hour and asleep at the right hour meant harmony with the whole. Rest was no longer an indulgence, but a duty to the rhythm that sustained life. Outside the monasteries, families also shaped their nights around patterns. Farmers rose with dawn, slept soon after dusk. Work and rest moved with the sun, not against it. Winter brought longer nights and deeper sleep. Summer shortened both. Time was not mechanical yet. It was seasonal, physical, organic. The cycle of light dictated the cycle of fatigue, and because no one resisted it, the world itself seemed gentler. Even in cities where noise and labor extended into the late hours, the rule of rhythm endured. Shops closed when candles burned too low. Street criers called the hours, marking the slow passage of dark to light. People found reassurance in these signals. Each sound told them they were still within the pattern of the living. In disciplined households, the head of the family decided the hour of sleep. Children learned early to obey it. Beds were shared, but dreams were private. When the final candle was blown out, all movement ceased. There was no negotiation with fatigue. It was part of the rule, like mealtime, like work. Rest was collective, not personal. When one slept, all slept. When one rose, the others followed. Even animals sensed the pattern. Dogs grew still when the last ember dimmed. Roosters waited for the first light. The house itself seemed to breathe in unison with its inhabitants. Time, then, was not something to chase, but something to keep pace with. No one asked for more of it. No one thought of saving it. It simply moved, circular and calm, returning each day to the same point. In that circularity lay peace. There were nights when rules softened, festivals, harvests, weddings. But even those were exceptions that affirmed the structure. After the laughter, people returned willingly to the steady pulse of ordered living. They knew that joy needed shape to endure, and rest needed borders to hold it. For travelers who arrived at monasteries seeking shelter, the first shock was not silence, but precision. Meals were taken at the same hour, doors closed at the same hour, prayers recited with the same tone. The night did not belong to whim, it belonged to design. And though many found it strict, they also found it restful. To know that nothing unexpected would happen between dusk and dawn was its own form of comfort. The rhythm of discipline extended beyond the clock. It shaped emotion itself. Anger could not grow wild in such measured days.
Excitement had nowhere to take root. The slow and steady pace of living dulled extremes and magnified steadiness.
Sleep followed that pattern too. Not deep with dreams, but even balanced, consistent. The great teachers of that age spoke often of order, but not to impose, rather to soothe. To know the hour of sleep and the hour of waking was to reduce confusion. It gave the heart a place to rest, the mind a sense of completion. There was dignity in routine, in being predictable to oneself, and in that dignity, exhaustion dissolved quietly into peace. When bells rang at midnight, some rose for their brief watch, tending the fires, walking the halls. These were the keepers of the rhythm. Their steps echoed through stone corridors, measured, careful, the same each night. They moved like clock hands before clocks existed, keeping time for those who dreamed. Their presence, unseen, gave continuity to the night. Because someone was awake, the others could sleep. Outside, the world of nature followed a different, yet not opposing rhythm. Wolves hunted, wind shifted, snow fell. But even chaos had its schedule. Tides rose, seasons turned. Human discipline was merely a mirror of that vast, dependable order. And perhaps in knowing that, people rested easier. The same world that could destroy them also cradled them in consistency. Time then was not counted but felt. It lived in the body, not the pocket. When hunger came, it was mealtime. When darkness deepened, it was night. When fatigue settled, it was time to sleep. The mind did not measure it. It trusted the body to know. In this rhythm, people found meaning. Work did not consume life because it was bounded. Rest did not feel wasted because it was planned. Every act had its moment, every silence its place. When the world is organized in such a way, anxiety has no foothold. There is always enough because there is always sequence. Imagine lying in such a world. A narrow bed, the faint echo of a bell fading into the dark. The body, conditioned by years of habit, begins to release itself at the right moment. The eyes close without effort. There is no thought of how to sleep, only the gentle realization that it is time. And time itself seems to agree, slowing down, wrapping the sleeper in its steady rhythm. Even the act of waking was calm. There were no alarms, no jarring lights. The bell rang again, or light entered through the window, and the body rose without resistance. The transition between sleep and waking was seamless, like the shift between tides. The body obeyed because it trusted the cycle to continue. This trust, between time and the human being, was a quiet kind of faith, not in doctrine, but in pattern. People believed in what repeated. They believed that day would follow night, that rest would follow work. It was enough. Predictability was safety. Safety was peace. Over the years, as machines appeared and clocks took control, this peace began to fade. Time turned from a companion into a master. The same bells that once comforted became alarms. But the memory of that older order lingers.
It remains in the body's ancient instinct to sleep when darkness deepens, to wake when light returns.
No matter how the world changes, the body remembers its old discipline. To live within time instead of against it, that was their secret. They did not bend it to their will, they matched its pace. And because they matched it, they rested fully. The disciplined world understood something the modern one forgets, that peace does not arrive from freedom alone but from rhythm. That order is not the opposite of rest. It is its foundation. And that a steady life repeated faithfully becomes its own kind of lullaby. So the bells continued through centuries, sounding across fields, towns and monasteries. Their tones softened with distance, carried by wind, settling over sleepers who no longer heard them but still felt their echo. Each ring reminded the world to breathe together. Each pause between notes held the silence that sleep needed. And in that long continuity of sound and stillness, the night maintained its balance. When dawn finally came, it was not an interruption, but a continuation. The bell that once called for rest now called for waking. The rhythm never ended, it only changed shape. And those who followed it, without struggle, without doubt, found themselves carried gently through the turning of days, at peace with both the hours and themselves. The end of the medieval night. Dawn arrives without sound. Before the sun appears, the dark begins to thin slowly, like breath fading from glass. The edges of things return first, the outline of a chair, the shape of a door, the faint shimmer where a window meets air. It is the softest kind of awakening, one that belongs not to people, but to the world itself. Inside the houses, nothing happens quickly. The first to stir is usually the fire. A hand reaches for the ashes, turns them, and finds a spark still living there, small and red. It is coaxed into flame, fed with dry straw, then with wood. The room glows faintly, the smoke climbs upward, and warmth begins again. People rise slowly. Blankets are folded back. straw beds straightened with quiet care. Someone coughs, someone yawns. The sound of morning is simple. Bodies returning to motion after the long stillness of night. Feet touch cold floors, shoes are pulled on, belts tied. There is no rush, but there is purpose. The rhythm that carried them into sleep now carries them out of it. Outside, the air is pale and damp. Mist sits low over fields, curling around fences and trees. Crows begin to call from somewhere unseen. The smell of smoke drifts through the air, a reminder that fires are alive again in many homes, not just one. It is not noise that marks the end of night, but the gradual layering of small, ordinary sounds. The night of the old world ends gently. It does not shatter, it releases. People return from their second sleep, the one that began after midnight and ended with the first hint of light. Their eyes adjust. Their hands reach for tasks left waiting, the pot to fill with water, the bread to cut, the door to open. Each movement is part of an unspoken ritual, the daily resurrection of work. For centuries, life followed this quiet cycle. Darkness, rest, dawn, labor. The simplicity of it held a kind of grace. There was no battle between the night and the morning, only transition. Even fatigue had its place, balanced within the pattern. The body understood when to rest and when to rise. The mind followed without argument. But slowly, the world began to change.
Candles multiplied, lamps burned later, and the boundaries of the night shifted.
What was once an unquestioned rhythm became negotiable. People began to stay awake longer, stretching the day into the dark. Shops stayed open, workshops glowed with new light. The division between rest and labor blurred. Segmented sleep, on the gentle duet of two rests, began to fade. The middle watch, that quiet hour between sleeps, disappeared. Instead came the long, unbroken night, a single stretch of darkness now filled with artificial glow. The human body did not protest at first. It adapted. But something subtle was lost, the unmeasured peace of the world before clocks. The clock changed everything. Where once the sun and the body dictated time, now metal and weight did. The ringing of bells, once a call to gather or to rest, became a schedule to obey. Time was no longer a landscape, it was a grid, and the night, once vast and slow, was divided into numbered hours. Sleep became a task rather than a rhythm. Still the body remembered. Even as cities brightened and work filled the dark, the old patterns lingered in muscle and blood. Sometimes in the early hours, people still wake without reason, an echo of the first sleep and the second.
They think it is insomnia.
It is not. It is the memory of a quieter age when waking at midnight was as natural as breathing. The houses changed too. Beds grew softer, rooms warmer, walls thicker. Privacy replaced proximity. Where families once shared a bed or a floor, now each person had a space of their own. The hum of communal rest faded into silence.
And yet, for all the comfort gained, the loneliness of night grew deeper.
The medieval night had been imperfect, full of creaks, drafts, and small discomforts. But it was shared. The modern one became solitary, sterile, almost too quiet. The soft murmur of others sleeping close, the rustle of straw, the sound of wind through gaps, all of it was replaced by sealed windows and hums of machines. Sleep became a private performance rather than a collective pause. The change was not wrong, it was simply different. Progress does not erase the past, it folds it. Within every modern sleeper lives the echo of those older nights, the steady rhythm of segmented rest, the patience with imperfection, the deep trust in the body's natural order. When dawn comes now, it arrives faster.
Lights blink on, alarms sound, the world stirs sharply.
There is less stillness, more momentum, but beneath the rush, the same truth remains. The body still craves safety before it can surrender. It does not ask for luxury, only the absence of threat. Sleep begins not when eyes close, but when the world feels harmless again. In the centuries since, much has been built, discovered, and measured. But the most human rhythm, the alternation of waking and rest, has not changed. The shape of night may look different, yet its purpose endures. To soften what the day has hardened, to slow what has been hurried, to remind life of its own pulse. If one could stand at the edge of time and listen, perhaps all the centuries of human sleep would sound the same. The breath of those who lived before us, the quiet exhale of farmers, monks, mothers, wanderers, all joining in one slow harmony that never ceased. Each generation adding its small, tired note to the long song of rest. And so, as the medieval night draws to its close, the story does not end. It only changes form. The people rise, their faces touched by pale light. They fold their blankets, tie their cloaks, step into the cold air. They do not think of history. They think of breakfast, of work, of the day ahead. But in that simple continuation lies the thread that connects them to us. They did not seek enlightenment in the night. They sought warmth. They did not dream of progress. They dreamed of safety. And though the centuries have replaced their straw with cotton and their fire with electric glow, the wish remains identical: to close the eyes and not be afraid. The medieval night fades, but its lesson stays. Rest is not the absence of motion, it is its balance. The body does not need perfection to find peace, only permission. The mind does not need silence, only rhythm. The soul, if such a word can be spoken without weight, only needs time to settle. Outside, the sun edges higher. The mist begins to lift. Children wake, their voices soft, the world filling again with human sound. The last traces of night retreat into corners, into folds of fabric, into memory. The day begins. It begins as it always has, quietly, inevitably, mercifully. And somewhere, in that slow turning from dark to light, a truth repeats itself. Every dawn is borrowed from a night that once held us gently. Every morning carries the echo of countless sleepers who rose before us. We are part of the same unbroken rhythm: sleep, wake, work, rest, the endless breathing of life. If you listen closely, even now, you can still hear the night breathing in its old pattern. A pause, a shift, a long exhale before letting the day in. That breath, once shared by peasants, monks, and travelers alike, still moves through you. It asks for nothing, promises nothing. It only invites surrender. Breathe in slowly. Let the air move through you like dawn through mist. Exhale softly. Let the weight of thought sink back into the earth. There is no need to carry the centuries. They have already carried you. Rest as they once rested. Simply, gently, without demand. The world will turn again when it is ready. The light will come when it must. Until then, let the night finish its sentence. Let the body remember what it knew long before time was measured. Sleep does not belong to the past or to the present. It belongs to the moment between, to the quiet crossing from dark to light, to the space where history pauses and breathing continues. The medieval night has ended, but night itself never does. It only travels from century to century, from heart to heart, from breath to breath. It is here still, resting in the corners of every quiet room, waiting to remind you that you are not separate from those who once closed their eyes under the same sky. So, breathe once more. Inhale slowly. Exhale gently. The night rests. The body follows. And in that shared stillness, between what was and what will be, sleep arrives again. Quiet, unhurried, complete.